One time he called me and he said, I'm in Las Vegas and I'm opening and I forgot my partial plate.
George Lindsey, known as Goober Pyle on the Andy Griffith Show, was beloved for his goofy charm and warm smile. But behind the scenes, not everything was as friendly as it seemed. Lindsey held a grudge that lasted decades against his co-star, Frances Bavier, who played the sweet Aunt Bee. The two actors, who seemed to fit perfectly into the peaceful world of Mayberry on screen, shared a real-life moment that left Lindsey deeply hurt and unforgiving. This clash revealed a surprising side to their relationship and left questions about how one event could have such an impact. But before we get into why he hated her, we need to go back to his life before the Andy Griffith Show. George Lindsey was born on December 17, 1928 in Fairfield, Alabama, a small town with simple roots. His parents, George Ross Lindsey, a butcher, and Alice Smith, raised him with traditional Southern values. He spent a lot of his childhood in Jasper, Alabama, living with his grandparents, which he often said gave him a sense of hard work and humility. Growing up, George wasn't all about acting right away. He loved sports, especially football, and became the quarterback for his high school team at Walker County High. After graduating in 1946, George headed to Kemper Military School in Missouri, and then to Florence State Teachers College, where he majored in physical education and biology. Imagine that. He wasn't initially set on becoming an actor at all, but life has a funny way of steering us, and George found himself drawn to the stage during college plays. After graduating in 1952, George joined the United States Air Force and got stationed at Ramey Air Force Base in Puerto Rico. Those years in the military were crucial for him. They taught him discipline and him stories he'd later share on stage as a comedian. When he finished his service, he moved back to Alabama and briefly taught at Hazel Green High School. But his dreams were bigger than a small-town life, so he set his sights on New York City. George wanted to get into the American theater wing, which was a big deal for actors, and by 1956, he was accepted. New York opened up new doors for George, but it didn't come without its struggles. He had to work hard, taking whatever roles he could find. In 1960, he even appeared on To Tell the Truth, a TV quiz show, as a nightclub comic who loved spearfishing. It was a quirky, fun way to make his way into the entertainment world, showing off his personality and humor that people would later adore. After finishing up with the American theater wing, George landed a few roles in Broadway productions like Wonderful Town and All American, but his big break was still a few years away. So in 1962, he took a leap and moved to Los Angeles, aiming for the stars in Hollywood. He started landing small roles on popular TV shows like Gunsmoke, The Rifleman, and even The Twilight Zone. Bit by bit, George was proving himself in Hollywood. Then, in 1964, he was cast as Goober Pyle on the Andy Griffith Show, which changed everything. All right, let's dive into the story behind the Andy Griffith Show and the surprising tension between George Lindsey, who played Goober Pyle, and Frances Bavier, better known as the beloved Aunt Bee. From the outside, Mayberry looked like a perfect place where everyone got along, but real life behind the scenes had its own share of drama. George Lindsey joined the Andy Griffith Show in 1964 as Goober Pyle, a lovable and quirky mechanic who could always make people laugh with his goofy antics and oddball charm. Goober was the cousin of Gomer Pyle, played by Jim Nabors, who had already become a fan favorite. Lindsey was great at giving Goober that simple, good-natured style, playing up his funny expressions and famously awkward Cary Grant impression, which fans loved. But as friendly and carefree as his character was, the atmosphere off-screen didn't always match up with what you saw on TV. Frances Bavier, who played Aunt Bee, was known for being the sweet, motherly figure who always had a kind word and a warm meal ready for her friends and family. But according to those who worked with her, Frances wasn't exactly the same as her TV persona. In fact, she was known for being pretty reserved and often kept to herself. She rarely mingled with her co-stars and didn't have the warmest relationship with everyone on set, especially not with George Lindsey. From the start, she seemed to have a strict sense of professionalism that didn't always mix well with the more relaxed, joking attitude of the other actors. George Lindsey talked about this in his memoir, Goober in a Nutshell, published in 1995. He wrote that Frances took her role very seriously and often struggled with the fun, casual atmosphere that the cast enjoyed. For example, Lindsey loved to joke around between takes. He'd get into goofy conversations, tell silly stories, and throw in some colorful language now and then, all in good fun to pass the time on set. But Frances did not approve of his style. She expected a more serious, respectful setting, and all the joking and casual talk on set didn't sit well with her. Lindsey described her as somewhat rigid, wanting things done a certain way and finding it hard to go with the flow when the others were just trying to have a good time. Then came the day on Mayberry RFD, the spin-off of the Andy Griffith Show, that changed everything between Lindsey and Bavier. The show was filming an episode called The Racehorse, where Aunt B had a prominent role. George Lindsey was doing his usual thing, joking around and maybe even using a few choice words. He was relaxed and playful, like he usually was. But this time it struck a nerve with Frances. She didn't just give him a look or a quiet comment. She went right up to him and scolded him. And then, to everyone's surprise, she hit him over the head with her umbrella. According to Lindsey, it wasn't just one whack either. She struck him twice, hard enough that the umbrella actually bent. That moment was shocking for everyone on set, especially for Lindsey, who felt humiliated and upset. The incident didn't just affect Lindsey's mood that day, it left a lasting mark on him. In his book, he wrote about feeling incredibly embarrassed, especially because other people on set had witnessed it. He never expected Frances to take things so far, and it created a rift between them that he claimed never healed. Ken Barry, who played Sam Jones on the show, was also upset about it. He felt Bavier's reaction was way out of line, and said that George hadn't done anything to deserve such a harsh response. It wasn't that George disliked Frances before this. He actually respected her as an actress. But after that day, he admitted that he never forgave her for the way she had treated him. And this incident wasn't a one-off moment for Frances. Other members of the cast and crew had their own stories of struggling to work with her. For example, Howard Morris, who played the character Ernest T. Bass and directed some episodes, found it challenging to work with Frances. He once described it as stepping on a landmine whenever he had to direct her. He knew he had to be extremely careful with instructions, because if he asked her to move a few steps or change her position slightly, she could become upset quickly, creating tension on the set. Sheldon Leonard, the executive producer, also found her to be the most difficult person in the cast to work with, even though he recognized her talent. The strange thing about Frances Bavier was that she seemed to feel the weight of her reputation too. She knew that her Aunt B character was beloved by audiences, but she also knew that she was not like Aunt B in real life. In an article from 1966, she even said that Aunt B was so much nicer than she was, acknowledging the differences between herself and the character. It was something she struggled with, and it may have contributed to her keeping her distance from the rest of the cast. Later in life, she revealed that this inner conflict over her role as Aunt B had become so tough that she eventually went to a psychiatrist for help. As the years went on, Frances's behavior continued to keep her apart from her co-stars. When Mayberry RFD started its third season, she was no longer part of the show. There wasn't much of an explanation given on screen. Sam, Goober, and Howard simply mentioned that Aunt B had gone to visit her sister and wouldn't be back anytime soon. In reality, though, it seems that her tense relationships with cast members, especially Lindsey, had contributed to her departure. Without Aunt B, the show moved forward, but her absence was felt by fans who loved her character. Even after the show ended, Frances kept her distance from her old co-stars. In 1986, when Andy Griffith and Ron Howard, who played Little Opie, decided to pay her a surprise visit, she refused to see them. She told them that it was because she hadn't been given notice of their visit. But many believed there was more to it, that she wanted to keep her old life as Aunt B separate from her real life. However, toward the end of her life, Frances did make one last gesture. She called Andy Griffith and expressed regret for being difficult to work with during the show. She apologized for her behavior, which gave Griffith some closure. Unfortunately, George Lindsey never received a similar apology, and if he had, he surely would have included it in his memoir. For George, that unresolved tension stayed with him long after the show ended. He held on to that moment, feeling it was unfair and unnecessary. Even though the Andy Griffith Show was a huge part of his life, bringing him fame and fan admiration, the memory of that umbrella incident and Frances's reaction overshadowed much of the good memories he had of working on set. Lindsey was loved by fans for his character and his own warm personality. But behind the scenes, he carried the weight of that one unexpected moment with Bavier. But here's another story about George Lindsey that might just blow your mind. He was reportedly considered for the role of Spock on Star Trek. Yes, Goober Pyle, the funny, simple mechanic from Mayberry, could have been Mr. Spock, the logical, serious Vulcan on the Starship Enterprise. This bit of trivia is surprising, right? It came to light during an interview segment of TV Land's 40th anniversary Star Trek marathon in 2006. Leonard Nimoy, who famously played Spock, mentioned that Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, had considered George Lindsey for the role. The way Nimoy said it made some people wonder if he was joking, but there's more to back this up. Ernest Borgnine, the star of McHale's Navy, wrote in his autobiography, Ernie, that Lindsey himself had told him he turned down the role.
I'll tell my dad about this, then you'll be sorry.
Oh, go ahead and tell him and see if we care.
Imagine that, George Lindsey with his trademark goober smile and Alabama drawl playing the ultra-serious Spock. It feels almost impossible to picture, right? But in a way, it makes sense. Before Lindsey found fame as Goober, he had a life full of unexpected twists. He was a college quarterback, a high school teacher, and even taught science for a while. So, seeing him in a role where he'd use his real-life teaching and scientific background isn't too far-fetched. If you're wondering how the idea even came about, it's interesting to know that The Andy Griffith Show and Star Trek shared some ties beyond their shared filming lot at 40 acres in Culver City, California. You could even spot places like Floyd's Barbershop in the Star Trek episodes, Miri and City on the Edge of Forever. But casting George Lindsey as Spock would have been an entirely different connection between the two shows. It's funny to think about what might have been. Lindsey's Goober had a knack for lighthearted, goofy comedy, while Spock was known for his straight face, sharp logic, and emotionless presence. Would audiences have taken to Spock if Lindsey played him? Would he have put a bit of that Southern charm into the role? Maybe we would have seen Spock do a goober dance on the bridge of the Enterprise. Okay, maybe not. But the thought of Lindsey playing one of the most iconic sci-fi characters ever is wild. In the end, the role went to Leonard Nimoy, who made Spock the legendary character we all know. But for George Lindsey, the fact that he was even considered shows that was much more than just the goofy mechanic from Mayberry. He had a range that surprised even his closest friends and fans. Just imagine if he'd chosen differently. We might remember George Lindsey in a whole new way today. But even without Spock, George's career was filled with memorable moments. After the Andy Griffith Show wrapped up, George Lindsey stayed with his character Goober in the spin-off Mayberry RFD. The show kept the small-town charm of the original series, and fans loved seeing familiar faces, including Goober, as they carried on the legacy of Mayberry. Lindsey played Goober until CBS decided to cancel the show in 1971. Even after Mayberry RFD ended, Lindsey didn't slow down.
Hillbilly concert, you wouldn't appreciate such
gentlemen, now listen.
Quiet. Let's hold it down. This is a jailhouse. Let's show some respect.
Disney also saw something special in George Lindsey. He lent his voice to a few beloved animated movies. If you listen closely, you can catch his voice in the Aristocats as Lafayette the dog. He also played Trigger, one of the vulture henchmen in Robin Hood, and had a role in The Rescuers as one of the swamp mice. Kids and families who watch these classics might not have realized it, but Goober was right there in their favorite movies, bringing laughter in his own way. One of George Lindsey's biggest long-term roles was on Hee Haw, a show that perfectly matched his roots and sense of humor. From 1972 to 1992, George played Goober again, but with a twist. This time, Goober was a bit wiser, a little more country, and fit right in with the barnyard jokes and musical performances. Hee Haw kept George in the spotlight for 20 years, connecting him with both new fans and those who remembered him from Mayberry. Outside of acting, George had a full personal life. He married Joanne Herbert, and they had 2 children, George Jr. and Camden Joe Lindsey Gardner, plus 2 grandsons. Although his marriage ended in divorce, George found companionship later in life with Nashville businesswoman Ann Wilson, who stayed by his side until he passed away. On May 6, 2012, George Lindsey died from heart failure at the age of 83 in Nashville, Tennessee. He was laid to rest at Oak Hill Cemetery in Jasper, Alabama, the town where his journey had started. Beyond acting, George's heart was set on giving back. He raised over $1 million for the Alabama Special Olympics over 17 years through his George Lindsey Celebrity Weekend and Golf Tournament in Montgomery. He also helped raise $50,000 for the Alabama Association of Retarded Citizens. And he didn't just raise money. He played an active role, even serving as head coach for the Winter Games in the Minneapolis Special Olympics national competition. George's commitment showed that he truly cared about helping others, especially kids with special needs. Education was important to him too. He set up the George Lindsey Academic Scholarships at the University of North Alabama, where he had once been a student. In recognition of his work and his connection to the school, the university awarded him an honorary doctorate in 1992. His hometown of Jasper even honored him by naming a highway after him, a testament to how much he was loved and respected in Alabama. George earned many honors throughout his life. In 1995, he received the Governor's Achievement Award from the Alabama Music Hall of Fame. In 1997, he got the Minnie Pearl Lifetime Achievement Award, which was special because it came from a fellow country entertainment legend. Then, in 2007, he received the first Icon Award from the Nashville Association of Talent Directors. On top of all that, George started the George Lindsey Una Film Festival at the University of North Alabama in 1998, a tradition that continues to celebrate filmmakers each year. So, while most people remember George Lindsey as the silly, lovable Goober, his life was much richer than just one role. From potential space traveler Spock to voice acting for Disney in his tireless charity work, George lived a life full of unexpected twists and heartfelt contributions. He's remembered not just for the laughs he brought, but for the kindness he spread along the way.